why differ on the things that man has created a difference in?
That's not enough for humanity.
Now, one of the things that many people suggest then is that it's Allah's fault if somebody is not guided.
That's your intoxication, right? You're intoxicated with this idea that it's God's fault. So I'm going to read this, and how I perceive it's going to relate to what I want to think.
But if we accept it, then God can guide us, because God can only guide those who accept his proofs.
I'm loving these analogies today. We've had the football, we've had the garden. It's Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Munib, and welcome to another podcast. With me, we have Brother Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
And we have Brother Mike.
Peace and blessings.
And we are back by popular demand because we just tried an initial podcast last week where we were unpicking verse Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 177. And number one, we had a lot of fun doing it, and we unearthed some real gems in discussing and studying it together. But also with the feedback and comments that we received, we decided to do another one. Hopefully this will be a series of podcasts where we will be unpicking various verses from the Qur'an. And we hope this will be very valuable for those who are watching on our YouTube channel or listening on the podcast. So thanks again, Brother Ahmed and Brother Mike, for hopefully what is going to be a very interesting podcast. So what we decided that we're going to do today, and the verse we're going to unpick today, is again in Surah Al-Baqarah. So it is chapter 2, verse 213. Now, we actually touched on this in the last podcast as a cross-reference point, but it had so many messages in it that we decided that we will do. It deserved a podcast in its own right, as probably every verse in the Quran deserves. But we will do 213 today. So now, for those, what I'm going to do just to start this is I'm going to put it on screen and let's see if this works. So just give me 1 second. Okay, is this working?
It is.
Look at that. We get better at this podcast every week. Now, I suppose to begin the study of this particular verse, it might be worth us just giving some initial views as to, what this, at a high level, what this verse contains. And I'll start it off. And we can then go into the individual messages and guidance and instructions in here. But for me, when I looked at this verse and I pondered over it, I saw 5 things. Number one, there is a historical lesson in this verse. Number 2, there's something about the role of prophets in this. Number 3, there's something about the role of the book of Al-Kitaab. Number 4, there's something about human nature in this verse as well. And number 5, there's something about the straight path, which we are all seeking from God. So there's a lot of things in here. And, as I was going through this verse, I was cross-referencing in my mind as I was going through it against those 5 different elements, which I was seeing as I was going through it. But so just to get the conversation started, I don't know, maybe Ahmed, do you want to just start with what you saw when you looked at this verse at the outset?
Right. Okay. So personally, I really liked what you depicted there, because eventually I did pick out on the same things. But initially, the thing that stood out for me was at the beginning, it says regarding humankind being one nation. And to me, that signified that is possible. And then it went on to say why it is no more, or it's no longer one nation. And to me, that signifies, that the description in here is quite important for us to understand what it is that divides us as people. And where we understand those divisions to be why those divisions are, sorry, how we understand those divisions. That's initially what, apart from unpicking, like, once I realized what words were used and how it's used, but initially that was what I
Yeah.
got this verse was giving us, some sort of confirmation that, of this unity around the world amongst humanity, and why that isn't like that.
Yeah, Brother Mike, any initial comments from you in terms of this verse overall before we get into that first point which Ahmed has put to us, which is around the unity of mankind?
Well, I think it's important. The first thing we should do is actually read the verse, just so people hear what we see and read. If you're okay with that, I'd like to read it. Was mankind a community single, then raised up Allah prophets as bearers of glad tidings and as warners, and sent down with them the book in truth to judge between people in what they differed in it and did not differ in it, except those who were given it from after what came to them the clear proofs, out of jealousy among themselves, and guide Allah those who believe regarding what they differed in it of the truth with His permission, and Allah guides whom He wills to a path straight. So, wow, there's so much there, right? It's talking about, in my perception of this, it's giving us the concept that ideally we're supposed to be one big community, or people start out as a large community. At some point, they become a large community, a single community. Or is it saying, and this is a hard thing to do because I just want to keep it simple at the moment, that was mankind a community single? One, right? One big community. Then it's as a, in my mind, it's as if to question that, because obviously we're not. And to the best of my understanding, we've never been able to be that. That is the ideal goal, is to be a community that's whole. It seems as if, to me, prospectively, it seems as if the way it's worded that God is saying, if He did this, then why would, and then He sends prophets and bearers of glad tidings and warners. We know that that's only done to a people that's never gotten the message, that's never gotten the truth. So we don't know the condition of this single community that God's talking about, right? We don't know their condition. So then He defines the condition in what I'm seeing, because He introduces the fact that He then sent them prophets as bearers of glad tidings and as warners. So they were given some good news, and they were warned about things to be careful of, how to behave, whatever the Quran teaches you. And then it goes on to define, and sent down with them the book in truth to judge between the people in what they differ in it and not differ in it. So now we know this community, even if it was a single community, that they weren't a perfect community. They had issues. They had things that they didn't know, and they had things that they did know. And so there's good news and there's a warning to be careful. But then there's those who were given the message with clear proofs, and among this group or type of people, they become very jealous. And I have to ask myself when I'm reading that, what are they jealous of? What is it that would create someone to be jealous when you're talking about a community that's one, or that's getting this? And I would have to say, as it goes on to describe, and that it is a people who are living within the parameters of the Quran. And when you do that, you tend to be a better person inside and out. You reflect a different attitude, a different person altogether. And your community, your family, everything you live in, then as they grow to do it, becomes more of a very solid community of one, and towards that utopic society. It goes on to saying, and guided Allah those who believe regarding what they differed in it, of the truth with his permission. And Allah guides whom he wills to a path straight. So these people as a whole were not even on the path yet. They're being introduced to the information that's going to put them on the path. And you have those who believe in it and believe in the truth, and you have those who either don't believe in it or are jealous of those who are living by it. And that often becomes people who are greedy, selfish, want power. The people who separate from the truth are typically people who are not on the right path. They're not on the straight path. And they can be easily identified with the truth, right? You give them the book. If they're going against the book, then they're obviously not on the path straight. And the path, that straight path, that's what we're seeking, to get the guidance, to get to the point where we can be righteous, right? So this is like a whole introduction of what it's like when a prophet comes to a community that's not gotten the message, and it's defining what happens every time that this happens. And we could see it in our own concept of Islam. You had the prophet, he brought a book, he said, follow and live by this book. The Quran teaches us that. And then what happened as soon as the prophet died and passed away? What happened to that society? It became corrupted with people who were greedy and jealous and wanted power and wanted to conquer. I mean, just all those bad things. Everything that God preaches or teaches against. They wanted a book other than this. They wanted something that was different that allowed them to get away with those things. And I think this is just a real basic description of that same process that's happened every time a prophet's been brought to a community. So, and it's not, what's beautiful about this, and what we have to remember, is the Quran is all encompassing and for all mankind. It doesn't say any particular religion. It doesn't say any particular belief. It's saying jealousy. That's the difference between following the truth and wanting to go outside of it. It starts with jealousy, or something to that effect, as an example. Just right off the top from reading it, that's what I get from that.
I'm really intrigued to talk about this point about the one community, and Michael's saying as just now that it's we've never seen it in our lives. We've not known of it, at least in recent history, that mankind has been one community. And what occurs to me is, first of all, that God is saying in this verse that it was mankind that was unified as one community. All of mankind. Can you imagine that scenario where all mankind is one community? So in my mind, this is talking about way back.
Like the community of Adam?
Yes, primitive times where there was quite basic intellectual capacity, still at the early forms of formation in mankind. And perhaps what God is saying in this verse is that as mankind developed, increased their mental capacities and the intellectual appetite, they started to diverge in terms of their views, and they formed conflicts of their views about what they need to do in this world, what this world is about. They perhaps created conflict in terms of moral values that they wanted to abide by or see in the communities. And then they started to become, divergent and different communities. And what God is saying in this verse is that I then sent prophets to guide them back. And it's interesting that God says that he then sent prophets to guide them. It means that one of the messages of the guidance is to unify mankind. That is one of the goals of existence, is to reunify mankind as one community, which is based on a shared moral compass, shared values, which are centered around what's being taught to us in the scriptures, the Al-Kitaab. Anyway, that's just some initial thoughts. And Ahmed, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I share some of the thoughts that you're saying with that, you know, we are trying to get back to that point, and this is the purpose of why God sent the prophets, and also with them the book that is the truth, that has the truth in it. The book judges between them in which they differ. Okay? And also, if we look at the verse, it's also the differences, I don't think, is what caused the need for this. I think that the cause for the need for this was the divisions that they had set up. Okay? So what we were saying about this idea of mankind being one nation, this is something that we haven't witnessed. So it's difficult for us to understand. So what I tried to do is to see how we can witness these events take place in real time, like during our lives. So not necessarily one nation, but how parts of mankind were one and then how they became divided. Yeah. And something that I found that related to myself with that was, for example, how children grow up as children and they have differences, but they don't let that divide them. And as we grow up into adulthood, these differences become more prominent in our lives in the way we behave and interact together. So we can then choose to accept those differences and work together despite the differences, or we can then choose, if we choose to build walls and barriers because those differences we want to exclude, then this is the need for a reason why to break those barriers and not to put these barriers between.
How interesting. I think that's a really good example. So because when we observe children, you're right, at that young age, they're very pure of heart. They've not had anything which, necessarily corrupts them.
Right.
And and they just love being amongst other children. It doesn't matter who they are, what they like. They just like being amongst other children, and they'll play with each other. They might fight for a little bit over particular toys or games or who's on whose team.
But that's just a learning process in
It's
that.
learning.
But they don't
Yeah.
differ in language. They don't differ in religion, color, creed, any of that. Doesn't matter what sex they are. They don't see any of those things unless they've been taught. And it's kind of like Adam and the apple, right? Until you teach them those things that could be the differencing between them, they don't see it. They're innocent of that.
So I want to propose something on this, which is that I was looking at verse 253 of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is chapter 2. This particular verse told me that becoming divergent in views is part of human nature. That actually God programmed humans to have this capability and possibility of diverging.
I can read it if you want me to.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right, verse 253.
Yeah.
These messengers, we have preferred some of them over others. Among them were those with whom spoke Allah, and He raised some of them in degrees. And we gave Isa, son of Maryam, the clear proofs, and we supported him with the Holy Spirit. And if had willed Allah, not would have fought each other those who came from after them, from after what came to them the clear proofs, and at what came to them clear proofs, but they differed. So of them are some who believed, and of them are some who denied. And if had willed Allah, not they would have fought each other. But Allah does what He intends.
So for me, that last part that you just read for us tells me that it is part of human nature, and that it is part of the programming of humans that we have the capacity to hold divergent views.
It's how the humans program themselves, basically. You could look at, there's studies of this that are out there where they show how people or children raised in different types of environments and societies. And then you bring all these different children together who've never met each other or anything like that. And they will already have, even like 10 or 12 years old, they will already have a point of view that obviously reflects the parents' point of views. So you'll have some that will judge others by their color. You'll have some that judge by their religious preference. You'll have some that judge by whether they're male or female, and the list goes on. It all depends on how the parents raise those children. That's a difficult part of that. If you're not giving the children their own ability to choose and learn and decide what is more important to them, because you're constantly influencing them with your adult cognitive, ideas. I think that's a clear example of that type of differing that leads to adults thinking that way, because they've already been programmed to do so. You could look at it within the Deen of Islam as well. Under the guise of the mainstream, right? Kids are taught that they have to memorize the Quran and recite it without even knowing what it means, but that's a bonus to them. And so when they get older, that's all they think. They don't even go beyond that. The program's already been established. So that division can start as early as childhood. It's based on what the parents teach the children.
Yeah, and it's interesting that so if one of the things which God is telling us through this verse is that one of the goals of mankind is to be one single community again, which isn't divergent in its views. And he has sent the scriptures, the books, Al-Kitaab, which is finalized with the Qur'an, to guide us towards that. That's a really big goal, for all of mankind to be unified. And one of the issues which I see it, and if you think about practically what this means for us now, because when we study the Qur'an, we have to think about practically what this means for us. What I was thinking about this was that, let alone unifying mankind, even those people who profess to uphold the Qur'an, so the Muslim community, they themselves are so divergent in their views. And Allah is saying in this verse that the scripture, the book, is to be used as the criteria to resolve those differences. But yet, when you look at the Muslim community, they're more likely to refer to imams. So I'll give you a very practical example. An ongoing debate about whether, you can keep a dog as a pet. Right? Just trivial matters such as those. The Muslim community will say, well, whether you can keep a dog in your home or not depends on which imam you believe,
Right.
and which imam you follow. The same about music, whether music is prohibited or not. So if Muslims themselves are so divergent and they're not using Al-Kitaab to resolve those differences, what hope do we have of unifying mankind into one community?
Well, this is a subject I was just about to pull up, is because we are given the two choices. So after when it says about the book and that's going to be the judge between the people, it says, no one disputed the scriptures except the very people who received them after the clear proofs came to them. Okay? And what they disputed was out of jealousy. What it's saying here is, once we've been given the clear proofs, once we've been given the bayinat and the book, if we're going to dispute that, then that's out of jealousy. But if then it says to us, if we're not going to dispute it, we're of the next group of people. So we're either going to dispute it or we're not. So what's the next one? It says, then Allah by his grace, out of jealousy, so then Allah by his grace has guided the believers to the truth regarding those disputes. Therefore, they realize that there are differences between them and they find out the truth. Okay? Therefore, once you've come to accept the truth, I don't think that changes the fact that there are differences between us. It doesn't make us the same. But what it does is it makes us understand the truth. So we are not disputing what is in the book and the revelation. We can dispute about everything else, but when it comes to what's in the book and what it judges between us and teaches us about our real differences, if we're to dispute that, then I think maybe that's when the issue arises. So if I need advice about, for example, something that's not in the book, I can take and have differences in opinion and stuff like that. But if it's going to be something to do with the book, then, for example, keeping a dog, if it disputes what's in the book, then it's not something that, is coming from the guidance of Allah.
Right.
If these people are disputing about this and not turning to the book, this is due to their jealousy or their envy.
Right. I mean, typically when they go to an imam or a scholar, just staying within our own deen, to be judgmental of our own deen, is that scholar doesn't go to the Quran. He goes to other sources from outside the Quran, like Hadith and Sunnah, and he makes his fatwa based on those. And so here you are relying on somebody who's using stuff not even from the book or not using the book at all, as instructed right here. So we already know that people who do this are not the ones who are on the straight path. They're not guided. And that's a huge thing to recognize. It's also, from the people who hear this that are on that side, it's going to be a hard thing to accept and believe. But ideally, us talking about things like this hopefully will plant the seed of doubt into what they've been programmed to believe, and maybe they'll decide to pick that book up and start reading it and using it the way Allah intended.
Yeah, so I mean, this is clarifying quite clearly, is it not, that the touchstone, the criteria to be used has to be God's revelation, the scripture, the Kitab.
Yeah.
And that is one of the key areas where we are going wrong. And the reason why our differences, our disputes, even within this community called the Muslim community, which suggests that it upholds the Qur'an and has Iman, it's one of the reasons why it is so divided into so many sects. And like I said, for me, it's, unless we resolve that, we have no chance of spreading it further to people who profess to believe in the earlier scriptures or those who do not believe in any scripture.
One thing I wanted to add maybe is, from this verse we can take it that the prophets were sent and they sent with them the book of truth, so they had the truth. So then it goes on to two different outcomes for people after that we just said. Either you're guided by God or you're not guided by God. So both these groups of people both had access to clear proofs
and guidance.
Yeah, so the option of being guided was there because they were presented with clear proofs, warnings, and good tidings, and they had the book of truth. Therefore, that's not enough for humanity. Even though it was sent, that was sent as clear proofs and warnings. What is required is guidance from Allah. because as it says in the other verse that you picked out, Munib, previously, I think it's 252, was it?
Yes, 253.
253, okay. Allah, we are dependent on Allah's guidance. I think that, we refer to the book, and then it's a matter of turning to God to guide us, and having this iman. And like we've discussed in the previous podcast about iman, is that these roles that we're having faith in, the fact that there's an ultimate creator, and there's angels and the prophets and the book. So the iman gives us that connection to God, and that connection to God can help guide us. So even if we have the truth and clear proofs, we can still differ without the guidance.
Could we then also turn it the other way around? So could we therefore also say that, so the hypothesis then is the alternate, which is that if we are so divided and we have these clear proofs, it means that overall or generally, we don't really have iman. Because if we had iman and we've got the clear proofs with us, then surely we would absorb that guidance from God, which would put us in a far better position than we are in at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we would be different but not divided.
Different but not divided. Because difference is okay. Yeah, difference is okay. Division is not okay.
That verse, it defines it at the end, right? 2:13. It says right at the end there, and Allah guides whom He will to a path straight. So they're not even on the straight path yet. He's guiding those who are willing to use the book and believe in it and judge with it for the truth, right? That's going to get them onto the straight path, but they're not on it yet. They're striving towards it.
Yeah, the clear proofs and the guidance. The clear proofs and the truth didn't do it. It wasn't the prophets and the proof that they had. It was God that guided them.
Right. That was the evidence just for them to judge for themselves. Do they want to believe or not? And once they've accepted and believe and start doing that, then that's the point when I think God's saying, and that's when they become guided to the straight path, because now they've set their base, their principles on these truths and this clear proof, and that's the beginning, right? In what I'm trying to say, that's the beginning of getting on that path.
Yes, and I think then it's also telling us that this lack of sufficient iman is what causes this jealousy and this animosity, which is at the center, according to this verse, of such division.
Right.
So if we had an appropriate level of iman and we were on that straight path, we wouldn't have those instincts of, or we would not allow the instincts of jealousy cause division. As we saw in the other verse, this thing in our nature, it's in our nature, we would have control over it, over this force that causes division through jealousy or animosity. It's
funny that you said it that way. Brother Ahmed and I had a conversation earlier today as we were just chatting about this in a realistic scenario. Because I asked him to present an example, and he said, well, look at it this way. What if you have a football team that you like, and I have a football team that I like, and your football team's doing better than my team? And so, I developed this jealousy or this animosity towards you for this football team that you have no control over. Yeah, it's just that's the team you chose to root for. And we were trying to relate how this would apply. And And I think it just came down to the simplicity of it. You, as the individual, have to govern your imam, and you have to ask yourself, okay, I know that the behavior of being jealous is not a good trait. What does the Quran tell me about this? So it's taking it back to the book and finding what the Quran teaches and shows you. And it shows clearly jealousy is not a great trait. It puts you on the wrong path, right? So then you have to come back and go, okay, I'm wrong for being jealous of him. And I have to, think it through. I'm being jealous of somebody who has no control over it. It'd be one thing if you own the team, right? It doesn't justify being jealous, but you could see where being envious of that person is much more defined because I own the team. I could be in control of whatever they're doing. But to be jealous of somebody and to be spiteful to somebody simply because they voted for a team that's beating yours, it demonstrates the simplicity of how something so minor and simple can lead to something so dramatic as a person, as a whole, in the way they conduct themselves. Because if you allow that behavior to continue as something so small and minor for something that has no bearing whatsoever, then how does that affect you when it becomes something real or serious? That person is driving a nicer car than me. Oh, I hate that person. Oh, I'm so jealous of them. That becomes something that just becomes a natural habit. You build it on your own by allowing it to continue to intoxicate.
Yeah, yeah. So in both those instances with the car and the team, is you either have a car or team that I don't have, and me bringing jealousy into it is going to cause a division. Yeah. So the difference is that I'm either not supporting your team or I don't have the car. So we have a difference. As soon as I bring jealousy into the equation, it's going to cause a barrier between that difference. But if I look to the reality of it, the truth of it, is that it's just the difference, and that difference doesn't necessitate me to cause a barrier between us. In fact, that should attract me to that person. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say so. Yeah.
And just to be clear, are we talking about American football or British football?
There's another division. Well, it's a difference. That's a difference. It's not a division. It's just a difference, right?
Very true.
Don't start this, Mike, otherwise we're going to fall out.
We're going to fall out. We don't want to do that. That's really interesting. For me, the reflection on this is how far away we are from where God is asking us to be. And as a community, I'm not necessarily saying every single person is on the wrong path. No, there are, of course, people who are striving to be on the right path. They're striving for unity, not just in the Muslim communities, but generally in this world. There are many, but there are few. If we look at the majority, and if we look at the way religion is organized generally, whether it's whether it's the Muslim community or the Christian community or whatever organized religion you look at, you don't see that overall you get people working towards this type of path. And in fact, the way they operate seems to encourage that sort of division. And you see that for example, in local Islamic communities, for example, over here, where the division with people who are not claiming to be Muslim is profound. Right? There is as the kids are growing up, we spoke about children, how they're pure at heart when they're young, but when they get to a certain age, many of them in their hearts, they not only recognize the difference between them and others, they also create barriers between themselves and others. So very soon you get into the realm of this, which is the reason why Allah is saying He sent prophets, and people who claim that they have Iman and they are or they are striving to have Iman, they really need to look at this verse and really think about this.
Not just this verse. This verse it gives you the defining point, right? But there's verses all throughout the Quran that say, don't imitate your fathers and your forefathers. So there's clear verses that define the behavior and how you're supposed to approach this. It's the Kitab. It's just the book. Don't imitate or copy your fathers and forefathers. Don't take what they taught you as 100% proof. When you get to the point of the age of maturity where you have a cognitive ability to read and understand for yourself, then you're responsible for questioning everything they're telling you and going back to the book and confirming that it's truthful. And it even says, even if you have a difference of opinion or understanding with your parents, you still treat them respectfully as your parents. But you don't follow or live by the way that they're dividing or separating or creating this division between you and them or you and other people. Oftentimes simply because they're a different religion. In the case of the Muslim community, the mainstream always teaches them that everybody outside of Islam as a religion, here we go with that religion concept again, every other religion they're kafir, they're shirk, they're doing everything wrong, and they're not going to heaven. They're going to contaminate you if you talk to them, if you associate with them, further creating these clear divisions and programming them to divide themselves where they're supposed to be, just like we said, just the opposite. They're supposed to be seeking ways to come together, not divide themselves. This has happened in every form of religion. and I say that, and I quote it that way because it's a book that teaches you a way of life to live that's healthy, that's proper, that takes care of you, yourself, your family, and your community. And that's what we're all supposed to be striving for. And doing it for the sake of Allah, not for our own self-gain or purpose. If we were to do that, which seems to be the community of one, that's the ideal utopic environment. It doesn't have to be just Muslims. It could be people of the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, the Buddhist faith, the Hindu faith. If their understanding and beliefs are the same in the end, we should all be able to accept each other in that understanding.
Yeah, well, I think what you're describing there, and possibly what's being described in this idea of all the people being one nation, if we were to define it into one word, it would be this state of Islam, which we know is the state of peace. Yeah, like, so if we're at peace, then that means all people can be one nation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I think one thing that I've been pondering on not long ago is this idea of making peace, going out to make peace. Now, what you were bringing up with this idea of religion, of how people, it seems to me what you're describing is that people are making peace with each other, but they're not seeking to go and make peace with people who are different from them. Yeah? Now, one thing that, the reason why I've been using this word peace is because I heard a quote, I can't remember where it's from, but it says that you don't make peace with people who you get along with.
You're already at peace with them.
Okay, so if we're going to go out to strive for the way of God in order to bring Islam, the idea is that we're going to break these barriers despite the differences. So we make peace with our enemies, not our allies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really want to use the word enemies because I don't really see it that way.
We don't see it that way, but the general population is taught to think it that way.
Yeah, but if there was someone to see me as an enemy because they've built a barrier, I would rather break that barrier down with peace than to try and use that barrier to separate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something
Yeah.
that I think is the concept of
I can give
Islam.
an exact example of this that happened yesterday. I grew up in Hawaii, the island of Hawaii, and that is a very diverse island with several cultures and several types of different nationalities, races. It's a very mixed, we call it a mixed plate. You get a little bit of everything. And the same with the religion out there, or religions, I should say. One of the more dominant ones there in the island is the Jehovah Witness. Those who follow the Jehovah Witness or are a very dominant religion out there. And because they can't go door to door and do their talking to people and sharing their deen with their religion, they found it. One of the family members or friends of family members from my growing up randomly called me to be able to do it over the phone with just somebody who was willing to listen. And I could have been like a lot of other people who goes, "Oh, so sorry, I'm this for religion or I'm that religion. I don't believe in your religion," and hang up. I would rather, like you said, build a relationship where we can be different in what we understand, but we could still have a relationship that doesn't divide us to the point of negativity. So I said, "Tell me what you got to tell me. What is it you want to talk about?" And so he would talk about things, and then I explained to him. I was very honest and straightforward with him. Said, "Now I don't follow the particular message that you're following. I am a student of the Quran, but I can relate to you that the stories you're saying directly relate to the stories in the Quran. So I'm using the Quran for me to verify the things that he's telling me. And when he comes to something that differentiates, I don't go, 'Oh no, that's not right. You're wrong. My book says this.' I give him exactly what my book says, but in a relatable way. I'll give a story, an example, similar to what we did, defining the difference between this understanding and that understanding. And he says, 'Well, this is what we believe.' And at that point, you have a choice. Do I say, 'Well, you're wrong'? Or do I say, 'Well, I understand that and I accept that that's your belief'? And we move on. We had a beautiful conversation. We talked for over an hour. And I learned a lot about him, his family, his life, and he's a good person. He wants to do good and be charitable, help others. It's all he's doing in his life. Who am I to judge him based on a religious choice to say that he's not on the path, even though his message may be skewed from what man has changed of it? He still has the Iman. He's still following the right path. He's being peaceful. He's not dividing. He's charitable. He's helping others. He's doing everything. He believes in one God. It's not our place to judge them for that. Simply to recognize that there are differences, and then we have a choice. Do we allow that to divide us, or do we try and bring ourselves together? So my goal is always to go out and challenge myself and to challenge others just like that, to bring us together, not separate.
I think that's a great example. It reminds me of something I heard someone say once, which really struck a chord with me, was that, linking back to what Ahmed was saying, was that Islam is to do with peace. And somebody once said that if you are a proper Muslim, which is a derivation of the word Islam, Muslim, Islam, you'll be a peacemaker. So a good definition of a Muslim is peacemaker.
Or maybe submitting to peace.
Yes. Yeah. This concept of unity and not having division while differences are acceptable is given in so many places in the Quran. One that people read quite often is in Surah Al Imran, chapter 3, verse 103, when Allah says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. It's a very clear instruction. Hold on to the rope of Allah, and we can have a separate discussion about what is the rope of Allah.
I can read the verse if you'd like.
That'll be very useful. Thank you.
Cling all together to God's rope and do not separate. Remember God's grace to you. When you were enemies, he united your hearts and you became brothers through his grace. You were at the edge of a pit of hell and he rescued you from it. God makes his signs clear to you so that you may be guided. Woo!
Yeah.
Very clear indeed. You were enemies and he made your hearts, through following and submitting to this, your hearts became one. You were brothers where
That's
you were
right.
enemies before. Wow, very clear.
And this is for mankind. This is not for the community that claims that we are Muslim. This is not about the religion, the Muslim religion. This is about mankind.
Mhm.
This verse is about mankind, as is the one that we are discussing today. So I think that's a really important theme, which we need to, I think, do more to get to infiltrate into our next generation. I mean, of course, our own generation as well, but certainly the next generation needs to understand that, because a lot of the education institutes, like the Islamic schools and so forth, the madrasas, they don't teach that. So that's really important.
That's very true.
Yeah, and I think again that's a description of being a peacemaker, is accepting or submitting to peace as the way that we want to live. So the relationship between being a submitter and a peacemaker, I think, is the fact that we use the truth we submit to the truth in order to be at peace with reality. And with this verse, how we see here is that in the section where it says, do not be divided, remember Allah's favor when you were enemies, then he united your hearts by his grace. So again, it's not the prophets, the messengers, or the book, it's Allah's guidance that we require in order for us to become united. And we if we turn to the book, I think, when we come to the Qur'an, the concepts in it that unite us are very simple. The concepts of one creator, the concept of accountability and the last day, and the concept of the fact that we have been given the opportunity to be guided. I think these are the main concepts that we need to agree upon. And there's not really much more outside of those agreements. So everything outside of there, bar from anything I've missed out of the Quran that it teaches, but what I'm trying to say is it's very simple and it's not something very difficult for us to unite on. But I think it's things that are attributed to the book or things that people say from outside the book,
Right.
that causes these differences. For example, so we say there's one God, and then will be a difference between the Christians because they say, oh yeah, we believe in one God but also a Trinity. So then the person becomes stumped on this Trinity. Like, I don't agree with the Trinity, but if the person can agree to one God, then anything outside of that is not in the book. Yeah, because
Right.
it does cover the Trinity in the book, but I am not to make a barrier between us from something that he has taken from outside the book. I just turn to the book for the clear proofs, and it proves it to me. If it doesn't prove it to someone else, that's on them, and maybe they're not receiving God's guidance yet.
Absolutely.
But who's to say that that's not going to happen tomorrow? And who's to say that, I am the one who's going to guide them? Why should I get upset and build a barrier as if I failed at guiding them? In fact, I should try and build a bridge, because if I can be a part of that guidance, it's a blessing to me.
Yeah, I fully agree. And just on that point, so we're talking about Allah's guidance, and it says here, and I'm going to try and see if this works. Allah says, Wallahu, oh, this works. Wallahu yahdi man yasha ila siratim mustaqim. So Allah's saying, and Allah guides whom He wills to a straight path. This is not a straight line. I apologize. By saying Allah guides whom He wills to a straight path. So what we've established is that the book itself, having the book itself, is not enough. You still need to be guided, right? Then Allah is saying that Allah guides whom He wills to a straight path. Now, one of the things that many people suggest then is that it's Allah's fault if somebody is not guided. Allah is the cause of individuals not being guided, and thereby being divergent in views and having animosity and jealousy and causing non-uniformity. And if you read this verse word by word, which is what those individuals will say, that's how it comes across. Just if you look at the words in this one.
I would say, and I've touched on this before, how you approach the book is how you're going to interpret the book. If you come to the book with the intention of seeking something that agrees with you, you're only going to read it and look at it in a way that agrees with you. That's your intoxication, right? You're intoxicated with this idea that it's God's fault. So I'm going to read this, and how I perceive it's going to relate to what I want to think. If you come at this with an empty, not intoxicated, no intentions, no agendas. You come at it just open and willing to, understand it. It's very clear. God sent down the book with the truth to judge between the people and what they differed. And it becomes that the individual's free will to choose if they want to accept the truth or deny the truth. God didn't do that. The individual did. What it's saying at the end, and Allah guides whom He wills to a straight path, is not for the individual that chose wrong. It's for the individual that chose correctly, that chose to use the truth and use the guidance from the book. Those are the ones that are being guided to a straight path by the will of Allah, because He gave it to them, but they still had the choice to make. The individuals are responsible for themselves, but those who don't want to be accountable for themselves will always seek to find somebody else as their scapegoat.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also verses where it says, Allah responds to your call. So,
Yes. Yeah.
if your call requires guidance,
Mm.
and you're sincere, then I'm not someone who would say that, Allah would leave you out
Yeah.
without reason.
Yeah.
And we also see Allah as just. So would it be true to say that it is just for someone to seek guidance and Allah not to provide?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I think, and the reason why I brought this out in this study is because, as you know, a lot of people do believe that you have to pray for God to guide you, but then it's up to God, right? And I think the verses which answer that particular point very clearly are verses 57 to 59 of chapter 39. Allah actually talks about this directly.
You want me to read them?
Yes, please. You found it quicker than I did.
Chapter 39, verse 57.
Yeah.
Or it should say, if that Allah had guided me, surely I would have been among the righteous. 58. Or it should say when it sees the punishment, if only for me another chance, then I could be among the good doers. 59. Yes, verily came to you my verses, but you denied them and were arrogant, and you were among the disbelievers.
There we go. So what Allah is saying here, He's actually saying that people will complain, as they do, as we see practically. People say, oh, if God had guided me, I would have been righteous, because it is God's will whether I'm guided or not. And God is saying here, yes, but I did guide you, or I gave you the guidance. It was available to you, but you did not heed.
Yeah,
So
that's where it yeah, verily came to you my verses, but you denied them and were arrogant. You believed that you did something, and that from there on it's all God's job. Again, putting the onus and responsibility on somebody else other than yourself.
Yeah.
We're directly responsible for every single thing we say and do.
So, do you see how in this verse they denied the verses? So what they're doing is they're denying the truth, and they became arrogant. Similar in the other verse, how when the truth came to them, and the proof, it was their jealousy that kept them from differing what was in the book. So here it says that they became arrogant once they looked the verses and they denied the verses.
Oh yeah, you're going to find there's other verses in there that also define other traits.
Yeah. So I think
Arrogance, hatred, jealousy, ego, greed. It's not just those two verses. There's other verses defining each of those traits for the same purpose.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, if you accept the revelation, or you accept the ayat, and I find with this idea of accepting things as truth is to be like blind faith. But I think in this case it isn't the case. I think the case is if we take the evidence and we accept that this could be evidence, we then have to then realize how that evidence comes into play to reality in order for it to form an idea of what the reason for this evidence is. Right? So, for example, to say that the Qur'an is guidance from God, you have to read it and you have to physically be able to pull out sections that are giving you guidance and say, as my evidence, this is my evidence, as we're doing here with these verses. So at the end of the verse, it's saying that basically because they denied, they kafaru, so they left the realm of iman. I think that's the concept. Someone who isn't iman, doesn't have iman, becomes kafir, so they're denying the truth. Someone who is accepting the truth and can comprehend. I think this is something that requires work. Again, something that we tend to, like we brought up last time. Okay? So once we get the proofs, we have to do the work. If we deny the proofs, we're not going to do the work.
Yeah.
And we're becoming arrogant. But if we accept it, then God can guide us, because God can only guide those who accept his proofs. If you deny them, then you're blocking that from being possible.
Right.
So the formula is, if I may, just because I have a mathematical background, the formula is that to receive Allah's guidance, it is the acceptance of his revelations and the true acceptance of it, the true evidencing of it, the absorbing of it in your heart, the establishment of true iman. If you have that, then what God is saying that, then I will guide you. You're ready for guidance then.
Yes.
Because you've accepted the revelation. You not just accepted it blindly, as I say, but accepted it through full intellectual acceptance. Then you're ready to be guided.
Right.
And his will is, when it says Allah guides whom he wills, his will is that he guides those who have gone through that process and have reached that stage.
I agree with that. You know, that's a great way of putting it as far as the figuring it out. And you could, there's lots of ways you could put that in a simple understanding, like a garden. It's bare. I don't have any seeds of understanding. I don't have any, truths for me to believe. Now I've been given this book full of beautiful seeds, all different kinds of seeds, and I plant each one of them. If I just plant them and leave them alone, there's no guarantee they're going to grow. They need water. They need to prevent the weeds and the bugs and the animals from getting anything that could corrupt them or take them or kill them off, right? So I have to do my part and tend to those seeds. And as they grow and become fruitful, then I will benefit from tending to them, from constantly tending to them, keeping them in my mind, thinking about them, applying them in my daily life, doing my best to live by them. Then I will benefit fully. That I will have been guided at that point, right? I have chose to be guided by planting the seeds. But if I don't tend to them, off I go to the other way, right? But if I tend to them, I'm nurturing them, I'm feeding them. By continually reading and pondering and seeking guidance from Allah, that's where the growth comes. And I think that's where the defining part, where it's saying they're jealous, right? So people are doing this, and they're growing and they're developing and they're benefiting from the fruits of their labor, so to speak, to put it in simple form. You have all these ones over here who didn't do it, right? Their garden's still bare. They're jealous of everything that's going on in my world. They want a piece of that.
And that effort can be also related to this idea of holding on to the rope of Allah. It requires work. So in order to keep this thing going, the guidance and the iman and everything, it requires the fact that we hold on to this, which requires some effort to keep on the path of truth.
Right. Beautiful.
I'm loving these analogies today. We've had the football, we've had the garden. It's fantastic. But it's actually, it is quite beautiful using analogies because it makes it real. And in fact, God uses analogies so many places in the Qur'an himself to explain in different ways. So that's really powerful. Thank you.
No worries. It's just what you see and what you hear.
Yeah.
It's what comes out.
So one other thing I wanted to very quickly go through, and I'm going to use my skills to share the screen again, and use my little pen. So let's reset this. There we go. So here, there is something here about the role of Al-Kitaab. which is worth just, I think, pondering over, where it says, Al-Kitaba bil-haqqi liyahkuma bayna nasi fiha. So, sent down with them the book in truth to judge between the people concerning that in which they differed. And I apologize, this is not straight line again. So there is something about, God is explaining the role of Al-Kitab. So first of all, Al-Kitab, the way I understand it, is these are the ordinances, the guidance, the scriptures which are revealed from God to mankind. So the Qur'an being the final revealed scripture which confirmed everything, all the other scriptures that came before it. All of the kitab contained the same messages. It was one. The message is one. And that's why Allah talks about Al-Kitab. The Al bit is magnifying the singularity of this, that the message was always the same. So he repeatedly sent the same message over time to different peoples around the world, in different communities, in different times. So he sent the book in truth to judge between the people concerning that in which they differed. If you can still read what I've crossed over here. So this is telling us about the role of Al-Kitab. It's providing the criteria for right and wrong, for the truth, for judging between right and wrong, so that these differences, or the aspect which cause the differences between different people, so not differences, divergence, as Ahmed rightly said, differences is okay, it's the divergence, lack of unity, which is the issue here. So that is the role of Al-Kitab, or at least one role of Al-Kitab. And the reason why I think it's worth pondering over that is because, again, if I look at today's world, barring a few, most people take Al-Kitab as something different. They take it in the mystical form that, if you recite it, you will obtain blessings from it, from God, and you will receive pardon if you recite certain verses a certain number of times at certain points during the day. You have all sorts of different.
Your sins will be wiped away.
Sins are wiped away. Yeah, forgiveness hacks, which come out from the Quran. So I just want to touch on that, because that again, I think, is a very serious problem we have at the moment. So we already discussed one, which is that the way we are set up, the way we are propagating religion, does not allow mankind to become a single community.
Right.
At the moment, in the main.
And all of them.
All of them. And this, I think, is another one where the scripture is not being used for the purposes for which the scripture was sent down through the prophets.
Right.
Yeah, they're using it to create divisions rather than to break these divisions. That is really well spotted.
Yeah, it's interesting that the center of all of it, if you take this entire verse and you take it from the beginning, which is talking about the required unity of mankind, or the required striving towards the unity of all mankind, and in the end, Allah's talking about being guided onto the straight path. The center of this, in terms of what provides that guidance and provides the criteria, is the scripture.
Right.
And so when people have a problem saying with the term Quran centric, they have a problem with one of the specific purposes for which the Quran was revealed, or any other scripture, because Quran is at the center of this. And so when people have a problem with that, or they use that term in a negative connotation, that, oh, you're a Quran centric person, which, by the way, I hear many times.
We all do.
Yeah. It's striking at the heart of what Allah, or one of the key things that Allah is asking us to strive to do, which is to unify mankind using the book at the center of it.
Yep. And early on in my learning about the Quran and studying the Quran and trying to understand the truths in it, uh, there's a lot of people who would deviate or misdirect verses directly out of the book. There's a clear verse. I'm not sure the number of it, but it bears down to something very simple. In what hadith after this, clearly defining it's referring to the book, will they follow? So that verse alone by itself clearly defines there's nothing outside of this book you can use as your deen. It has to be through this book. And if you look at everywhere where Al-Kitaab is given to you, every place it's used, it's the same theme all the way through. Here you've got in the book, the truth is in it, but you divide yourselves intentionally. And it goes through all these different traits, right? Why you perceive, why you're angry, why you're jealous, why, you know what I mean? It will break down every single reason not to ignore this book. And the trait that you may be using at the time or be intoxicated with at the time and may not realize that that's the issue, and it defines it to bring you back. But if you're not willing to accept that and go to it, that's where the issues start. Then they go off. They're not guided again, right? They're off the path. And I guarantee you, most mainstream Muslims that we know are on that wrong path. They're not guided. It's depressing. It's sad, it's depressing, and it's heartbreaking when you ask somebody who is strong in their belief, when's the last time they read the Quran? Actually read it. And they'll say, oh, I recite it all the time. Okay, recite something for me. You know, not to be judgmental, but to test that, you know, to get them to think about what they're saying. And they'll recite a verse in Arabic, and I'll ask them, so what does that verse mean? Can you translate it in English to me? And not a clue. And not to judge them, but that's the fact. That's a truth. And those who do know Arabic, if they translate it in English or ask them what it means to explain that verse to you, unless they're somebody typically of an imam or a scholar or somebody who studies deeply, they don't have the ability to even do that. They then revert to the, well, you should see a scholar or the imam, because I'm afraid I might tell you an error. I might do something wrong and say something wrong. That fear that's instilled into them that shouldn't be an issue. They shouldn't have a fear to go to the book and read it and understand it, right? But it's been instilled into them. And that then becomes another trait that's being taught that you should not be doing. That's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people.
And it goes back to, I think, ultimately, if we think about some of the lessons from this verse, as we kind of begin to summarize some of this, it's about mindset, isn't it? And if we have a mindset, and this goes to, again, how we are brought up and how we are educating our children in terms of the mindset that they should have. We started off with talk about how, you know, when they're born, they're pure of heart and, you know, pure of mind as well. But as they get older, what we're doing is we're changing their mindset to not respect the differences with others. And Allah says in the Qur'an, He encourages us to think about differences as beautiful, as a blessing from God. You know, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we just take an analogy of the garden again, when we see different flowers of different breeds, of different kinds, we say, oh, how beautiful is that? Look at that blessing from God, the beautiful different flowers with different colors, different types. Some are taller, some are not so tall, some live longer, some don't. You know, some are reaching out to the sky and absorbing the sun, whereas others are near the bottom and they're, you know, not getting so much sun. But we marvel at that difference that Allah has created. But when it comes to mankind, we don't celebrate the differences between mankind or what people are looking to do or how they want to live. We create barriers, as Ahmed said, we create barriers instead. And we teach our children to create those barriers. We indoctrinate them with that. And as we studied earlier, God has instilled in the nature of mankind to be able to create that kind of barrier. And mankind is creating that barrier. And then God is saying, I've sent you Al-Kitaab, I've sent you prophets to try and bring you back to some purity. But it's mindset, isn't it? Because if our mindset is one of not thinking of a difference as bad, if our mindset is one of not allowing jealousy to come to the forefront and control us, animosity, hatred, because of differences, we will be a much better community and probably will be on our way to becoming unified again.
Right. It's understanding what the concept of being intoxicated is, right? You have to cognitively be able to understand what that is and what it entails, and to understand that it's not all physical or external. Most of it's internal. It's in your mindset, how you think and how you perceive. If you catch yourself getting angry, do you just follow through with it and continue until you vented everything out? Or do you recognize that you're angry, stop, and find a way to take a breath and calm down? It's being able to do that, I think, is the hardest part, right? Because if somebody presents you with a clear truth from the book and you deny it simply because it doesn't meet what you've been taught, you deny it wholly because your whole life you've taught to believe something else. That's that difference, right? Of going, oh wow, that came out of the book. Wait a minute. So why am I taught? Why do I believe this? If you truly are believing in the book and the messengers and the message and everything that's come with it, you would not question that at all. You would in fact seek to understand it and find the truth and the difference between that and what you've been doing. And then when you find that truth, you should be desiring to correct yourself. That's when the guidance starts. That's when you get back on the path. Everybody has the ability to do that. What we're fighting as individuals, trying to plant that seed and teach people to go to the book, is not to believe everything we say, but to literally do your own research and verify what we say is true. We're trying to plant the seed of curiosity, the seed of desire to want to find out and confirm what you're doing is right or wrong. There's nothing stopping anybody from doing that as an individual, but as a religion, that's where our biggest battle comes, because you have an established hierarchy and an established religion that depends on people not thinking for themselves. It depends on you relying on them to think for you and educate you with what they think you should know and believe. Under the concept of going to the mosque, getting a khutbah, going through the khutbah, doing your ritual, whether you do a ritual prayer or not, anything like that, that's not what I'm holding against you. But have you taken the time to open up a Qur'an and study and read it while that khutbah is being taught to you? Are you verifying that what he's saying is true? Is the hadith he gave you confirmed or denied in the book? Is the concept of following a hadith acceptable in the book to begin with? None of that's ever challenged. I've gone to many mosques and gone through the whole process. Never are you allowed to stop the imam and say, hey, I have a question. I've gotten shoved right out the door the minute I've done that.
You will be out.
Because you're going against the criteria, the standard that they've established. You're not allowed to question that. If you can't question the imam about something that you see that's different in truth in the book, in order to learn and educate yourself, or maybe determine whether that is true or not, then it's not that environment is not according to the book.
One other example I would give which I was thinking about, and it's related to this point about unifying mankind. So most people of any religion are following that religion because they happen to be born into that religion. Most people. There are, of course, people who, transfer from one to the other. Mostly people are born into the religion. So a person that is born into a Muslim religion, now they could be they could be part of any number of sects within the Muslim religion, but let's just say they're in the Muslim religion. And let's just say they're a really not a good person. They care for the parents and their neighbors and everything else. Then across the road, there's another person who happened to be born into a family that follows the Christian religion. That person is also very good, the way they treat the parents and everything else in the household. That Muslim person or that Christian person, in the main, when they hear that that person is of another religion, there will be a barrier that will be put up immediately. Oh, that person's a Muslim, or oh, that person's a Christian. Stay away from that person. It's a Christian. And so the reason why I state that is that what it tells us about this unfortunate situation we have, that the barrier that is put up between people happens because of the luck of the draw as to which religion you were born into. So that person across the road who's born into a Christian family didn't choose to be born into a Christian family, but was born into a Christian family. But the hatred or this division that this Muslim person will have for that is because that person happened to be born into a Christian family, which wasn't his or her choice. So a lot of this division happens because of the luck of the draw and the barrier that's put up.
Like the football scenario. I have no control over the football team.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I can see why this relates to the verse that we did last week, because how we said turning to the east or the west, one person is on this side and the other person is on that side, and that's caused the division. Whereas if you're going to measure a person, is it the label that they put on themselves, whether or not they're wearing a cross around their neck, which temple they go to, which religious place they go to, or are we going to look at the things that were listed in that verse, where it's talking about how they treat the people around them and their attitude towards the Creator and the angels and the messengers, the prophets, the relationship with the Scripture. So people, for example, a Christian would might say, "Oh, we don't go by the Qur'an," whereas a Muslim would say, "Oh, we don't go by the Bible."
Right.
Rather than saying, "Okay, where can we find things that relate within these books that, confirm what is being said in them?" For example, both books say one God. Both books say do good. Both books say, don't cause harm. And, there's very similar things, many, many very similar things that guide us towards performing these acts. I don't think any of the books encourage us to go to temples or grow beards or wear crosses or wear these hats. Or I don't think either of the books encourage this, but both of them encourage feeding the poor, helping the needy, being good to your parents.
That's what I was going to say. The example given was they're both good people. They're both charitable. They're both, giving. They're both helping people. They're doing all the things that they should be doing. Their imam is on the right path. Even though the message came from two different books, or two different messages, they came from the same book. Their message initially came from the same book. So they're going to have the truths in there that they both have. There's going to be the falsities of what's been created outside of them, but the truths are there. In the Bible, you got for a very basic, the Ten Commandments. All of them things are in the Quran, right? You've got all these Ten Commandments that is, don't covet thy neighbor, don't steal, don't, do all these things. It's all simple commands, how to live properly. Those are all the same in each book. And you can relate those because those are the direct commands of how you're supposed to live, right? Why differ on the things that man has created a difference in his for his own purposes, right? That's just a division that's not necessary. It's unnecessary, but there are those who want to keep the concept of a religion as a whole sound in both parties because they have benefits as you grow and get higher in stature, in popularity. It becomes something where you're doing it for
Power.
popularity and money and power, ego, etc. So you could see where they're intoxicated. Those who are intoxicated by those traits, how they deviate. They're very openly visible how they're deviating from the truth and trying to deviate.
Yeah.
Their
sorry, go on.
No, I mean their actions speak louder than the words that they may put out.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you then, but you kind of painted a mental picture in my head about these people causing these divisions. And these are not from the book. So these mental barriers that aren't from the truth, basically dividing yourself off from everyone. Yeah, and building walls.
Right.
Whereas the alternative solution is to have differences, yet not build a barrier, more like building a bridge. So I think this verse itself is to do with us building barriers or bridges. It's the choice between going forth and building barriers or building bridges. And if you build bridges, you're going to end up being connected to everyone.
Right.
But if you build barriers, you'll end up in some sort of cube, blocked off from everyone else.
Well, I mean, what's the concept of building bridges and being connected to everyone? One community, right? Access to everybody and understanding between all of you. Even though you have differences of opinion, you still maintain a relationship that's along the same guidance and teaching of the book between all of you.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to make this political, but in terms of the powers which divide people and tell people to put barriers up, not build bridges, I think it goes to the concept of, at least partly, to the divide and rule concept.
Right.
Because if you divide people, you'll have a greater chance of having a community of people that you are ruling over, because you have given them the rules outside of the scripture. You have said that this is our tribe. All the other tribes are your enemies. So let's build a barrier. And it's a strong tribe, and we are the best tribe. If anyone leaves this tribe, they deserve to be killed. But this is our tribe, and here are the rules. And if we follow this, and if we maintain our tribe, we're going to feel good. We'll feel really good about it, because we're part of this tribe. We have a label for it as well. And I think there's a lot about the divide and rule concept which comes into the forces which work against this verse that we've spoken about in human nature. And it gives people power, and people thrive on power. They love power. It's something which, the shaitan has made this appealing.
Right.
To have power and control over people. And, this is what has happened with any organized religion. It's become, a lot of it is dividing and ruling.
I mean, the concept of an organized religion is what's created to be able to do that. Because you're organized. During the time of the prophet, you had all these free-willed, free-minded thinking people. And then they were starting to gather. It was called the Golden Age of Islam, to the best of my understanding. You had people coming from everywhere to be a part of this. And it was growing. Math and science and biology and geology and all this stuff is being created and expounded upon and learned and growth, right? Good stuff. The prophet passes. Now we're left with people who were not guided, who want the power of controlling these people. Now I'm going to create some sort of way to get these people to be united, like you were saying, together. How do I do that? I create a process where they have to gather on a regular basis and become unified and together as a group, right? So I create a concept of a mosque or a place to worship. And then I give them a criteria of rituals they have to do together, which makes them feel unified and doing something all together at one time. It builds that concept of togetherness. Now, what I teach them and tell them, whether it's truth or falsehood, that's a whole nother story. But I'm not going to allow them to question me while I do it. You see how it starts to tie in and become this religion. It wasn't a nice way to live your life and to have a community that's like-minded and living a good life with the choices to do good or bad. But now you're forcing him. It becomes compulsive that you have to do these things to be able to reach the point of heaven, completely diverting from everything God tells you in the book. It's very deceptive. It's really important to point out and start to identify how this happened so that people can see and recognize that it did happen and that there's a great possibility that they're not guided yet. They're not on the path.
I think that's a lovely concluding message there. I think this verse, is so much about building bridges and breaking down barriers, and that being one of the key tenets of the message. I think, as we said earlier, strikes at the heart of the way we grow up and the way we are educated and the way we have responsibility to educate people, to be building bridges, not putting up barriers. So we've been going for nearly 2 hours. Shall we leave it there?
I think maybe in a couple of years we could come back to this verse and just discuss it again for a couple of hours.
Yes.
That's how I feel like I think last time you referred to going in for a dive into water.
That's right, in the ocean.
Yeah, and I just feel like I'm becoming proficient at swimming with this.
yeah, exactly. Because the way I was presenting it was that we dip into the ocean, and once and God basically through the Qur'an teaches how to dip and learn what the message is, and we become more proficient, and that we enjoy it, and we like to go deeper. And we want to say, hey, we've got to come back to this and actually go deeper and uncover some more of God's blessings, which are in this verse, for example. Yeah. There's so many pearls. You want to discover these pearls in the ocean. And that's the way I think of it as well, that we've just dipped. And we actually went quite far today, but we know that when we become more proficient, we can go deeper for sure.
Yeah.
Well, what I think is actually happening is that, so we read a verse and then we are, seeking through going over it, we are seeking guidance, and God is kind of helping us understand it at different levels. So when it says in that verse that then Allah by his grace has guided the believers, I think that like we're going over the proof now, and it's later on when the guidance happens, not just when you first read it.
Right. Absolutely. It's like we put our toe in the water and we felt that it was warm and comfortable. Oh, that's great. Let me put my feet in.
Let's see how deep it goes this time. Yeah. Maybe next time we go even deeper.
Exactly. Next time we'll dive in and look for the pearls at the base,
Yeah. I mean, there is so much more, isn't there? I mean, today we discussed, for instance, near the end of it, what the role of the book is, Al-Kitaab.
Right.
But this also has the role of the prophets, which we could discuss as well. We could have gone on that. And we went quite deep in terms of the natural instinct of jealousy and animosity and barriers and stuff. That was amazing
Intoxicants.
discussion there.
I keep pushing that, and for a purpose, good purpose, because I find that people just don't realize what it means to be intoxicated by the definition of the book. So whenever I hear it and they're talked about, I'm going to continually push this intoxicants, intoxication, intoxicated, because people have been, again, given a barrier to believe that it's just external, i.e., drugs, alcohol, things of that nature, when in fact it's their very own nafs. Is that the right word? Their very own thoughts and things, the way they perceive things and react to them.
Yeah, it's character, isn't it? You can form this character through the description in the Qur'an of the type of people that went wrong and the type of people that succeeded. And you can build this character and say, right, this is the kind of person that Allah is saying is going to be achieving success in this world, and of course then the hereafter as a result of that. And this is the type of person that will fail in both worlds. And and once you create that character in your mind, which I think you can only really do in your mind, it's quite hard to actually describe it on paper. It has to be something that you can feel. Then you can start thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? Where am I going wrong, or what I can do, and how can I educate myself further? How can I self-improve? How can I improve others that listen to me? How can I influence others? I think that's when you start to do that. And all of these verses that we're discussing, they're giving us a part of that jigsaw, aren't they? Even the one we discussed last time. We spoke about the mental side and the active side. And today we spoke about some of the feelings that causes division. And if you put those together, it starts to form something in your mind. It's quite a rich picture.
The idea of asking the audience if they have anything so that we can cater to somebody who's asking.
Yes.
So maybe it might surprise us what we might come across.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I would say that now. What you heard us talk about. Are you thinking about what we discussed about what it means to be dividing yourself from others or building a bridge? I challenge you to look at the things you do and how you think and perceive people in your life and start determining whether you're building a bridge or building a barrier, or if you've already got a barrier or bridge built. If you've got a bridge built, then walk that bridge, practice it, do it, continue to build that growth. If you've got a wall, I challenge you to break it down.
It'll be great to hear from everyone, from people who are watching this or listening to this podcast, of what their reaction was to what we discussed. And I mean, other people swim in this ocean, so we would love to hear about other ideas of what other people have picked up from this verse, how they see it.
I just wanted to say thanks for everything, and I really enjoyed being on here, so I really appreciate being invited, and it really is a blessing.
You're part of this podcast, and we can't let you get away now.
No.
All three of us come from different backgrounds.
Yes.
This is why I listen so attentively to you, because everything you say, almost everything for me, is something new, and there's new information, new angles, there's new psychology in there, there's new theology in there, and we have lots of commonality. If you drew a Venn diagram, there's a lot of commonality in how we think, but there are also additional things that come from the different backgrounds that we have.
Right.
And that is so valuable.
There's a message behind that is significant to what we've been talking about, is that the fact that we have differences made us more stronger by building these bridges between us to come to a better understanding. Had you have seen these differences as problems, maybe you would have built a wall, and it wouldn't given us this. It would have stopped this opportunity from coming into fruition.
It would have become negative.
So true.
It is fulfillment from my heart and soul. I promise you, this is enlightening, and fulfilling and educational, and it creates a beautiful bond. It's all of it's wonderful, and it helps me grow to be a better person.
Great. That's great. Great message. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So I think we'll call it there until next time.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن